The gunshot cracked through the dawn air like thunder, sending a flock of startled crows into the sky as Abel Rowley's bullet found its mark in the weathered fence post, dead center where he'd chalked an X. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving sun of the Wyoming Territory was just beginning its daily climb across the vast blue canvas above the Diamond R Ranch. Abel lowered his Colt, squinting against the golden light that illuminated the dust particles dancing in the morning air. His calloused hand moved automatically, reloading the chamber with practiced precision. At 32 years old, he'd been working this land for 7 years, building something from nothing after returning from the war with nothing but nightmares and a determination to find peace in the solitude of the frontier. "Nice shot, boss," called Emmett, his ranch foreman, walking up with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Though I reckon you'd hit it blindfolded by now." Abel holstered his weapon and accepted the offered cup with a nod. Man gets rusty if he doesn't practice. His voice was low, weathered like the leather of his saddle. "Heard there's a new schoolteacher coming to Whispering Pines today," Emmett said conversationally. "Mayor's been boasting that she's from back east, Philadelphia or some such place." Abel grunted non-committally. The small town of Whispering Pines, nestled 20 miles from his property, could hire 100 schoolteachers from 100 eastern cities, and it wouldn't change his daily routine. The ranch demanded his full attention: the 50 head of cattle, the 3 hands he employed, and the constant battle against drought, rustlers, and the harsh Wyoming elements. "Oh," Emmett added as an afterthought, "and happy birthday." Abel's face hardened immediately, his jaw clenching beneath his neatly trimmed beard. "It's just Tuesday, Emmett, nothing more." The foreman knew better than to push. In the 5 years he'd worked for Abel, he'd learned which subjects were off limits. The war, Abel's family back in Virginia. And birthdays, especially Abel's own. "Sure thing, boss, just Tuesday." Emmett sipped his coffee, changing the subject smoothly. "That broken fence on the north pasture ain't fixing itself." Abel nodded, grateful for the return to practicality. "Take Jacob with you." "I'll check the western ridge. Those tracks I found yesterday worry me. Could be wolves or rustlers." As Emmett headed toward the bunkhouse to rouse Jacob, Abel drained his coffee and stared at the horizon. He preferred the simplicity of ranch work problems with clear solutions, dangers you could face head-on. Unlike birthdays, which carried the weight of memories he'd spent years trying to bury, his mother had always made birthdays special. Even during the war, when food was scarce, she'd managed to make him a small cornbread cake for his 18th, just before he'd enlisted. It was the last birthday he'd celebrated. 2 months later, she was dead, their home burned by Union soldiers who'd discovered his father's Confederate sympathies. And on Abel's 21st birthday, he'd been in a Union prison camp, watching men die of dysentery and starvation. No, birthdays weren't for celebrating anymore. They were for surviving, like every other day. Abel whistled for his horse, a powerful chestnut stallion named Thunder, who trotted over from the corral. As he adjusted the saddle, his thoughts turned to the western ridge and the mysterious tracks. The ranch was finally turning a profit, and he couldn't afford to lose any cattle now. "Let's ride," he murmured to Thunder, swinging into the saddle with the ease of a man who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. As they galloped away from the ranch house, Abel pushed all thoughts of birthdays firmly from his mind. The western ridge offered a commanding view of Diamond Arctic's most remote pastures. Abel dismounted, kneeling beside the tracks he'd spotted yesterday. They were boot prints, not wolf paws, and fresh, probably made within the last day. He followed them carefully along the ridge until they disappeared into a rocky outcropping. "Rustlers getting bold," he muttered to himself, checking that his rifle was within easy reach on Thunder's saddle. Cattle rustling had increased over the past months, with several neighboring ranches reporting losses. Abel had doubled the night patrols, but his property was vast, and his men were few. The distant sound of hoofbeats pulled his attention back to the present. Instinctively, his hand moved to his holster as he scanned the horizon. A single rider approached from the direction of Whispering Pines, moving at a steady pace along the main trail. Abel waited, watching as the figure drew closer. To his surprise, it was a woman on a dappled gray mare, wearing a simple riding habit of dark blue. Her hair was secured beneath a practical hat, but as she approached, he could see it was a rich auburn color. She pulled her horse to a stop when she spotted him, hesitating momentarily before continuing forward. "Good morning," she called as she drew near, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "I hope I'm not trespassing. I was told this was the way to the Diamond R Ranch." Abel straightened, removing his hat in a gesture of courtesy his mother had ingrained in him long ago. "This is Diamond R Land. I'm Abel Rowley." Her face brightened with recognition. "Mr. Rowley, how fortunate to find you directly." "I'm Beatrice Jameson, the new schoolteacher in Whispering Pines." Abel nodded cautiously. "Mayor Thompson mentioned you were arriving, but I'm surprised to find you out here, Miss Jameson. Town's a good 20 miles back." "Please call me Beatrice," she said, dismounting with surprising grace for someone who moved with the telltale carefulness of an Easterner unused to Western horses. "Mayor Thompson mentioned that several children from outlying ranches haven't been attending school. I thought I'd introduce myself to the families, starting with yours since it's the largest operation in the area." "No children at Diamond R," Abel said flatly. "Just me and 3 ranch hands." If she was disappointed by this information, she hid it well. "Nevertheless, I'm glad to make your acquaintance. Perhaps you know of other families I should visit." Abel hesitated. He didn't make a habit of socializing with his neighbors, but he knew of at least 2 families with school-aged children within riding distance. "The Hendersons have 3 young ones about 10 miles southeast of here. And the Wilsons have twins, maybe 12 years old now, straight east beyond the creek." Beatrice smiled, and Abel was struck by how it transformed her face. She wasn't a classic beauty, but her clear green eyes and that smile created something more compelling than mere prettiness. "Thank you, Mr. Rowley. That's precisely the information I was hoping for." She glanced at the sky. "I should continue if I want to reach the Hendersons before midday." "You shouldn't be riding these parts alone, Miss Jameson," Abel said, surprising himself with his concern. "There have been rustlers about." Her chin lifted slightly. "I appreciate your concern, but I grew up riding in Vermont. Different terrain, but I'm more capable than I might appear." "Vermont's not Wyoming Territory," Abel countered. "These rustlers aren't just after cattle. They'd take a fine horse like yours without hesitation, and they wouldn't ask politely." Uncertainty flickered across her face, and Abel felt a twinge of guilt for frightening her. But better scared than dead, the frontier was unforgiving to the naive. "I could accompany you to the Hendersons," he found himself offering, "as I need to speak with Jim about the water rights agreement anyway." The relief in her eyes was evident, though she tried to maintain her composure. "If it wouldn't be an imposition, I would welcome the company, Mr. Rowley." Abel whistled for Thunder, who trotted over obediently. "No imposition. I was heading that direction regardless." It wasn't entirely true, but the rustler tracks had him concerned enough that escorting Miss Jameson seemed the responsible course of action. As they rode side by side toward the Henderson property, Abel found himself stealing glances at his companion. She sat her horse well, despite her Eastern background, and seemed genuinely interested in the landscape, asking questions about the plants and wildlife they encountered. "How long have you been in Wyoming Territory, Mr. Rowley?" she asked as they crossed a shallow stream, their horses picking their way carefully over the rocky bottom. 7 years, he replied. "Came west after the war ended, worked as a ranch hand until I could save enough to buy my own place." "You fought in the Civil War." Her voice held no judgment, just curiosity. Abel nodded stiffly. "Confederate side, Virginia infantry. My father was a doctor with the Union forces," she said quietly. "He treated soldiers from both sides whenever they came under his care." Abel appreciated that she didn't press further. The war was another topic he preferred to avoid, especially with strangers. "And what brings a Vermont-raised, Philadelphia-educated woman to Wyoming?" he asked, deliberately changing the subject. Beatrice smiled, adjusting her hat as a breeze threatened to dislodge it. "Adventure, I suppose. And opportunity. Teaching positions for women are more plentiful out west, and they pay better too." She paused before adding, Plus, I wanted to see this country for myself rather than just reading about it in newspapers and novels. And now that you've seen it." Abel gestured to the vast landscape surrounding them, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the endless sky stretching above. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," she answered honestly. "And harsher too, but I don't regret coming." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, until the Henderson homestead came into view, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, smoke rising from the chimney. 3 children were visible in the yard, the oldest chopping wood while the younger 2 chased a chicken. "Looks like you'll have your first prospective students," Abel commented, nodding toward the children. Beatrice straightened in her saddle, brushing dust from her riding habit. "Do I look presentable, Mr. Rowley? First impressions are important." Abel found himself smiling slightly. "You look fine, Miss Jameson. Just be direct with Jim Henderson. He respects straightforwardness." The visit to the Hendersons went better than Abel had anticipated. Jim and his wife Martha were immediately taken with Beatrice's genuine enthusiasm for education, and by the time they departed, the 3 Henderson children were provisionally enrolled in school, with Martha promising to bring them to town twice weekly. That went wonderfully. Beatrice exclaimed as they rode away. "Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Rowley." Abel shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Henderson's a good man. He wants better for his children than he had. And the Wilsons, are they similar?" Frank Wilson's more stubborn. "Believes book learning is less valuable than practical skills." Abel considered for a moment. His wife Sarah might be more receptive, though. Beatrice's determination was evident in the set of her jaw. "Then I'll appeal to Mrs. Wilson. Every child deserves an education, regardless of their circumstances." Abel found her conviction admirable, if somewhat idealistic. "The Wilson place is another hour's ride. We should move along if we want to reach them before dark." The October day was pleasant, with just enough chill in the air to remind them that winter wasn't far off. As they rode, Beatrice asked about the history of the area, and Abel found himself talking more than he had in months, pointing out landmarks and sharing anecdotes about the early days of his ranching endeavors. "You've built something impressive, Mr. Rowley," she said, as he finished telling her about the first harsh winter when he'd nearly lost everything to a blizzard. "It takes remarkable strength to persist through such challenges." Abel felt an unfamiliar warmth at her praise. "Just stubbornness, Miss Jameson. My father always said I was too mule-headed to fail." "Is your father still in Virginia?" she asked. "He died in '63, pneumonia." Abel kept his voice neutral, though the memory still carried pain. "Mother followed in '64 when our home was burned." Beatrice's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your losses. My mother passed when I was 12. It leaves a void that never quite fills." The shared understanding of grief created a momentary bond between them, and Abel found himself looking at her differently, not just as the new schoolteacher, but as someone who might comprehend parts of his experience that few others could. The visit to the Wilson farm proved more challenging, as Abel had predicted. Frank Wilson was politely resistant to the idea of his twins attending school in town, citing the distance and the necessity of their help on the farm. But Beatrice was persistent, finally winning a concession that the boys could attend 3 days a month during the winter months when farm work was less demanding. By the time they left the Wilson place, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "We won't make it back to town before dark," Abel observed, concerned. "The trail's too dangerous to navigate at night, especially with rustlers in the area." Beatrice bit her lip, clearly worried. "What do you suggest, Mr. Rowley? Diamond R is closer than town." "You can stay at the ranch tonight, and I'll escort you back to Whispering Pines in the morning." Seeing her hesitation, he added, "Mrs. Peterson, our cook, has a room off the kitchen. You'd be perfectly proper under her supervision." After a moment's consideration, Beatrice nodded. "That seems the sensible solution. Thank you for your hospitality." The ride back to Diamond R was largely silent, both tired from the day's exertions. When they finally arrived at the ranch house, lights were glowing in the windows, and the smell of cooking food greeted them. "Emmett must have told Mrs. Peterson we'd have company," Abel remarked as he helped Beatrice dismount. His hands lingered briefly at her waist before he stepped back, suddenly conscious of their proximity. Mrs. Peterson, a stout woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, welcomed Beatrice warmly while giving Abel a look that clearly communicated her expectations of propriety. Abel suppressed a smile. Mrs. Peterson had been mothering him since he hired her 3 years ago, and she was the closest thing to family he had now. "You're just in time for supper," Mrs. Peterson announced. "Miss Jameson, you must be exhausted after riding all day. Come wash up while Mr. Rowley sees to the horses." As Abel led the horses to the stable, he found himself thinking about Beatrice's determined spirit and her genuine concern for the education of children she'd never met. It was refreshing to encounter someone whose idealism hadn't been worn away by the harsh realities of frontier life. Supper was a livelier affair than usual at Diamond R. Beatrice charmed Emmett and the other hands with stories of Philadelphia and her journey west. Mrs. Peterson, typically reserved with strangers, was soon sharing her own tales of crossing the Oregon Trail 20 years earlier. Abel found himself watching Beatrice more than participating, noting how she drew out even Jacob, the shyest of his ranch hands. After the meal, when the hands had returned to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Peterson was showing Beatrice to her room, Emmett lingered at the table with Abel. "Quite a lady, that new schoolteacher," Emmett remarked casually. "Smart as a whip, too." Abel nodded, reaching for his coffee. "She's determined to educate every child within 50 miles from the sound of it. Might be good for the territory," Emmett observed. "My own schooling stopped at 10 when Pa needed me in the fields. Always wished I'd learned more." Abel considered this. He'd been fortunate his mother had been educated and insisted her son be the same, hiring tutors even when money was tight. "Maybe so," he conceded. Emmett stood stretching his tall frame. "Almost forgot. While you were playing escort to the schoolmarm, I found more tracks by the North Creek. Definitely rustlers, and they've grown bolder. Looks like they took 2 of our yearlings." Abel's expression darkened. "We'll increase the night patrols. And I want you to ride to Sheriff Donovan tomorrow. Let him know what's happening." "Will do, boss." Emmett hesitated before adding, "And about tomorrow, Mrs. Peterson's been baking all afternoon. Says even if you won't acknowledge it, she will." Before Abel could respond, Emmett had quickly bid him good night and disappeared, leaving Abel alone with his cooling coffee and irritation. Mrs. Peterson meant well, but he'd made his feelings about birthdays clear. Tomorrow would be just Wednesday, nothing more, nothing less. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Abel rose before sunrise, as was his habit, and was surprised to find Beatrice already in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Peterson prepare breakfast. "Good morning, Mr. Rowley," Beatrice greeted him cheerfully. "Mrs. Peterson has been teaching me how to make proper biscuits. Mine always turn out like rocks." Abel found himself momentarily speechless. Beatrice had exchanged yesterday's riding habit for a simple blue dress, presumably borrowed from Mrs. Peterson and hastily altered. Her auburn hair was neatly braided and coiled at the nape of her neck, and the morning light through the kitchen window gave her skin a warm glow. "Morning," he finally managed, reaching for the coffee pot. "You're an early riser." "Habit from my teaching days in Philadelphia," she explained, cutting biscuit dough with practiced movements. "Children arrive early, and there's always preparation to be done." Mrs. Peterson gave Abel a meaningful look over Beatrice's head, which he deliberately ignored. He knew what the older woman was thinking, that Beatrice Jameson would make someone a fine wife with her practical skills and pleasant nature. But Abel had long ago decided that ranching and marriage didn't mix, at least not for him. He'd seen too many women broken by the isolation and hardship of frontier life. Breakfast was another surprisingly enjoyable meal, though Abel noticed Emmett and the other hands exchanging glances when they thought he wasn't looking. They'd be disappointed when the day passed without any birthday acknowledgement, but that was their problem, not his. After the meal, Abel prepared to escort Beatrice back to Whispering Pines. As they saddled their horses, she seemed thoughtful. "Something troubling you, Miss Jameson?" he asked, tightening Thunder's cinch. She hesitated before answering. Mrs. Peterson mentioned that today is your birthday. I wanted to wish you many happy returns of the day. Abel's expression closed immediately. Mrs. Peterson talks too much. It's just Wednesday. If Beatrice was offended by his brusque response, she didn't show it. Of course. Nevertheless, I appreciate your hospitality and your escort yesterday. You've made my introduction to the area much smoother than I anticipated. Feeling somewhat churlish for his rudeness, Abel moderated his tone. You're welcome. It's a rough country for newcomers, especially women traveling alone. The ride to Whispering Pines was pleasant, with Beatrice asking intelligent questions about ranching operations and the local economy. Abel found himself explaining the complexities of cattle breeding and the challenges of getting herds to market, topics he rarely discussed with anyone outside the ranch. You speak of your cattle almost as if they're your children, Beatrice observed with a smile. There's pride in your voice. Abel had never considered it that way. I suppose they're the closest I'll come to having offspring, each generation improving on the last through careful selection. You don't wish for children of your own someday? The question was asked lightly, but Abel sensed genuine curiosity behind it. Ranching doesn't leave much room for family life, he replied after a moment. Most women wouldn't tolerate the isolation, the constant work, the uncertainty. Some might, Beatrice countered, with the right partner and proper preparation for what such a life entails. Abel glanced at her, surprised by her perspective. You sound as if you've given it thought. A slight blush colored her cheeks. I've always believed that with mutual respect and shared purpose, most challenges can be overcome. But I'm being presumptuous. I've only just arrived in Wyoming, after all. Their conversation turned to less personal topics as they approached Whispering Pines, a small but growing town with a main street lined with the essential businesses of Frontier Life General Store, blacksmith, saloon, and the newly built schoolhouse where Beatrice would teach. Abel escorted her directly to the mayor's house, where she was boarding until more permanent accommodations could be arranged. Mayor Thompson's wife, a friendly woman with an obvious penchant for gossip, seemed delighted to see them arrive together. Mr. Rowley. What an unexpected pleasure, Mrs. Thompson exclaimed. We so rarely see you in town. Just escorting Miss Jameson safely back, Abel explained, tipping his hat politely. She visited some outlying families yesterday regarding school attendance. How gallant, Mrs. Thompson beamed, ushering Beatrice inside. You must stay for tea, Mr. Rowley. I've just baked some fresh scones. Abel declined firmly but politely, citing ranch business that couldn't wait. As he prepared to depart, Beatrice stepped back outside momentarily. Thank you again, Mr. Rowley, she said, extending her hand. I hope our paths will cross again soon. Abel took her hand briefly, surprised by the warmth that traveled up his arm at the contact. I'm sure they will, Miss Jameson. Whispering Pines isn't large enough for paths not to cross. As he rode away, Abel found himself glancing back at the mayor's house, where Beatrice stood on the porch watching his departure. There was something about her that lingered in his thoughts, her intelligence, her determination, or perhaps simply the way she'd looked in the morning light, flour on her cheek as she learned to make biscuits in his kitchen. The following weeks brought an unexpected shift to Abel's routine. He found reasons to visit Whispering Pines more frequently, supplies that couldn't wait, banking matters that suddenly seemed urgent, meetings with other ranchers that had previously been handled by letter. And each visit somehow included an encounter with Beatrice Jameson, whether at the general store, the post office, or once, memorably, at the town's small lending library. Mr. Rowley, she'd greeted him with evident pleasure. I wouldn't have taken you for a literary man. Abel had felt uncharacteristically self-conscious holding a volume of Tennyson's poetry. My mother enjoyed poetry. I find it calming sometimes. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, she quoted softly, and something in her understanding expression had touched him deeply. They'd walked together to the schoolhouse afterward, where Beatrice proudly showed him the improvements she'd made, new maps on the walls, a growing collection of books, desks arranged to accommodate children of various ages. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and Abel found himself offering to build additional bookshelves when she mentioned needing more storage. "That's tremendously kind, Mr. Rowley," she'd said, her green eyes bright with gratitude, "though I insist on compensating you for your materials and time." "Consider it my contribution to the territory's education," he'd replied, surprising himself with the offer. Diamond R benefits from educated neighbors as much as anyone. November brought the first significant snowfall, blanketing the landscape in pristine white and making travel between the ranch and town more difficult. Abel found himself missing the easy excuses to see Beatrice, though he was reluctant to admit it even to himself. The rustling problem had worsened throughout the territory, with several ranchers reporting significant losses. Sheriff Donovan had organized a meeting of local ranchers to discuss forming a protective association, and Abel rode into town despite the challenging conditions, knowing the matter was too important to ignore. The meeting was held in the back room of Whispering Pines' only saloon. A dozen ranchers and their foremen crowded around tables, the air thick with tobacco smoke and tension. Sheriff Donovan, a competent lawman despite his youth, outlined what they knew about the Rustlers, a well-organized band that struck quickly and moved stolen cattle across the territorial line before they could be recovered. "We need men willing to patrol the boundary lines," Donovan concluded. "Regular schedules, coordinated efforts, it's the only way we'll catch these thieves." The discussion that followed was heated, with disagreements about scheduling, territory division, and leadership. Abel, who preferred action to endless debate, finally stood. "While we argue they're stealing more cattle," he said firmly, "I propose we divide the border into 6 sections, each ranch responsible for one section's patrol. 2 men per patrol, rotating weekly. Start tomorrow." His practical suggestion broke the deadlock, and within an hour, the patrol schedule was established, with Abel and Emmett taking the first watch on the section closest to Diamond R. As the meeting dispersed, Abel noticed Beatrice entering the saloon's main room, looking somewhat out of place among the rough crowd. He made his way to her immediately. "Miss Jameson." "This isn't a typical stop for the town schoolteacher," he said, concerned about her presence in such an establishment. "I was looking for you actually," she explained, seemingly unperturbed by her surroundings. "Mrs. Peterson sent word that you might be delayed by the ranchers' meeting, and I—" She hesitated, then continued with determination. "I wanted to invite you to dinner tomorrow evening. The Thompsons are hosting several town residents, and Mayor Thompson specifically asked me to extend the invitation to you." Abel rarely accepted social invitations, preferring the solitude of his ranch to town gatherings. But the patrol wouldn't begin until the following night, and the thought of an evening in Beatrice's company was unexpectedly appealing. "I'd be honored," he said, surprising both of them with his ready acceptance. Relief and pleasure crossed Beatrice's face. "Wonderful. 7 o'clock at the Thompsons. Nothing formal, of course." Abel escorted her out of the saloon, acutely aware of the speculative glances following them. Whispering Pines thrived on gossip, and he had no doubt that his unusual social activities were already a topic of discussion. Strangely, he found he didn't care. "May I walk you back to your boarding house?" he offered, noting the darkening sky and swirling snow. "Thank you," Beatrice accepted, pulling her woolen shawl tighter. "The weather's turned rather fierce, hasn't it?" They walked side by side through the snowy streets, their conversation turning to the rustling problem and the newly formed patrol. Beatrice listened attentively as Abel explained the challenges they faced. "It sounds dangerous," she commented as they reached the Thompson residence. "Please be careful on patrol," her concern touched him. "I've faced worse, but I appreciate your worry." They paused at the gate, snowflakes gathering on Beatrice's shawl and hair, giving her an almost ethereal appearance in the fading light. Abel felt an overwhelming urge to brush the snow from her cheek, to feel if her skin was as soft as it looked. Instead, he stepped back, maintaining a proper distance. "Until tomorrow evening, then." "I look forward to it," she replied softly, and Abel carried the warmth of her smile with him all the way back to Diamond R, The dinner at the Thompsons proved more enjoyable than Abel had anticipated. The mayor had invited several prominent citizens, including the banker Mr. Hargrove and his wife, the town doctor and his spinster sister, and the owner of the general store. Conversation flowed easily, covering topics from the weather to territorial politics to the progress of the new schoolhouse. Beatrice, seated across from Abel, was a vision in a simple but elegant green dress that heightened the color of her eyes. He found himself watching her more than participating in the discussions around him, admiring her intelligence and the diplomatic way she navigated potentially contentious topics. After dinner, when the men retired to the mayor's study for brandy, and the women gathered in the parlor, Abel found himself in conversation with Dr. Williams, a thoughtful man who had served as an army surgeon during the war. "Miss Jameson has made quite an impression on our little community," the doctor observed, following Abel's gaze as it drifted toward the parlor doorway where Beatrice could be glimpsed in animated conversation with Mrs. Hargrove. "She seems dedicated to her students," Abel replied neutrally, "Doctor." Williams smiled knowingly. "Indeed, and it hasn't escaped notice that the reclusive Mr. Rowley has found more reasons to visit town in the past month than in the previous year." Abel felt a flush of embarrassment at being so transparent. Ranch business has required more attention in town lately. "Of course," the doctor agreed amiably, clearly unconvinced. After a moment, he added more seriously, "She's a fine woman, Rowley. Intelligent, kind-hearted, stronger than she appears. The territory needs more like her." Before Abel could respond, Mayor Thompson called for everyone's attention, proposing they join the ladies for some music. Mrs. Hargrove was persuaded to play the piano, and Beatrice revealed a lovely singing voice as she led the group in several popular songs. When the evening finally drew to a close, Abel offered to escort Beatrice to her new lodgings. She had recently moved from the Thompsons to a small cottage behind the schoolhouse. "Did you enjoy yourself tonight?" she asked as they walked through the quiet, snow-covered streets. "You seemed rather reserved during dinner. I'm not accustomed to social gatherings," Abel admitted. "But yes, it was a pleasant evening." He hesitated before adding, "You sing beautifully." Even in the dim light of the street lamps, he could see her blush. "Thank you." "Music was an important part of our household growing up. My father believed it soothed the soul." "A wise man," Abel commented. "My mother played the piano. I haven't heard much music since." He trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Beatrice seemed to understand without explanation. "Perhaps we could arrange some musical evenings at the schoolhouse. For the children primarily, but adults would be welcome too." They reached her cottage, a modest but charming structure with smoke curling from the chimney. Mrs. Thompson had evidently sent someone ahead to light the fire. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Rowley," Beatrice said, turning to face him at her door. "And for coming tonight. I know such gatherings aren't to your taste." "Some company is worth the effort," Abel replied, surprised by his own candor. Their eyes met in the soft glow spilling from her window, and for a moment, Abel thought he might take her hand, or perhaps even, but the moment passed, propriety reasserting itself. "Good night, Miss Jameson." "Good night, Mr. Rowley. Be safe on patrol tomorrow." As he walked back to where he'd left his horse, Abel realized that for the first time in many years, he was experiencing something dangerously close to happiness. The Rustler patrol proved more demanding than anticipated. For 2 weeks, Abel and his men took turns riding the boundary section they'd been assigned, often in bitter cold and driving snow. Their vigilance was rewarded when Abel and Jacob intercepted 3 men driving a dozen cattle bearing the brand of a neighboring ranch. The confrontation was brief but violent. Jacob took a bullet in the shoulder before Abel managed to wound one rustler and drive off the other 2. They recovered the stolen cattle but lost the rustlers, who escaped across the territorial line where they couldn't be pursued. Abel returned to Diamond R with Jacob and the recovered cattle, his frustration evident. Dr. Williams was summoned from town to treat Jacob, arriving with an unexpected companion, Beatrice, carrying a basket of supplies and food. While the doctor tended to Jacob in the bunkhouse, Beatrice helped Mrs. Peterson prepare a hearty meal for the exhausted men. Abel, washing up after the long, difficult ride, was surprised to find Beatrice waiting with a cup of hot coffee when he emerged from his room. "Doctor Williams mentioned you might have pushed yourself too hard," she said, handing him the steaming cup. "You look exhausted." Abel accepted the coffee gratefully. "Jacob's wound is my responsibility. I should have been more cautious in our approach." "From what I heard, you saved both Jacob and the cattle," Beatrice countered. "That hardly qualifies as failure." Her steadfast refusal to allow him to shoulder unnecessary guilt was oddly comforting. They moved to the kitchen where Mrs. Peterson was putting the finishing touches on a beef stew that filled the house with savory aromas. "Doctor says Jacob will recover fully," Mrs. Peterson announced. "But he needs rest and care. No patrol duty for at least 3 weeks." Abel nodded, mentally rearranging the patrol schedule. With Jacob injured, they were short-handed, which meant longer hours for the rest of them. "I've asked Sheriff Donovan to send word to the other ranchers," he said, sitting heavily at the kitchen table. "We need to adjust the patrols, possibly bring in additional men." Beatrice placed a bowl of stew before him. "Eat first. Decisions will keep until you've restored your strength." There was something so natural about her presence in his kitchen, her practical concern for his well-being, that Abel found himself momentarily speechless. He simply nodded and began to eat, realizing only then how hungry he truly was. Dr. Williams joined them shortly, confirming that Jacob's injury, while serious, wasn't life-threatening. "He'll need watching for infection, but Mrs. Peterson seems more than capable. I'll return in 2 days to check on him." As the doctor prepared to depart, Beatrice hesitated. "I should return to town as well, school tomorrow." Abel, who had been hoping she might stay longer, concealed his disappointment. "Of course, thank you for coming, Miss Jameson. Your help was appreciated." "I'll accompany them back to town," Emmett offered. "It's nearly dark, and those rustlers might still be in the area." Abel nodded his approval, though part of him wished he was strong enough to make the ride himself. But exhaustion was setting in, and he knew he needed rest before tomorrow's patrol. Beatrice paused at the door as she was leaving. "Please be careful, Mr. Rowley. The cattle aren't worth your life." The genuine concern in her eyes stayed with Abel long after she'd gone, giving him an unfamiliar feeling of being valued for himself rather than just his abilities or possessions. December arrived with brutal cold and more snow, making the rustler patrols increasingly hazardous. Yet the efforts were proving effective. Reports of stolen cattle had decreased significantly throughout the territory. Abel adjusted the Diamond Arcticus patrol schedule to compensate for Jacob's absence, taking many of the night shifts himself, despite the protests of Mrs. Peterson, who claimed he was working himself to the bone. Despite the demanding schedule, Abel found himself riding into Whispering Pines more frequently than necessary, often timing his visits to coincide with the end of the school day. He would wait at a discreet distance, watching as Beatrice bid farewell to her students, her face animated with enthusiasm even after a full day of teaching. When the last child departed, he would approach casually, as if his presence were mere coincidence. "Mr. Rowley," she would greet him, never quite hiding her pleasure at seeing him. "What brings you to town today?" They fell into a pattern of walks through town, sometimes stopping at the general store where Abel would insist on carrying her purchases, or at the library where they would discuss books they'd both read. Occasionally, when the weather permitted, they would extend their walks to the edge of town, talking about everything from territorial politics to childhood memories. Abel found himself sharing stories he hadn't recalled in years: his mother's garden in Virginia, fishing expeditions with his father, his first attempts at riding. In turn, Beatrice spoke of her Vermont upbringing, her father's medical practice, and her determination to become a teacher despite limited opportunities for educated women. "You never married," Abel observed during one such walk in mid-December. The question had been on his mind for weeks, though he'd hesitated to ask something so personal. Beatrice smiled wryly. "There was a gentleman in Philadelphia, a fellow teacher. We were briefly engaged, but he couldn't accept my desire to come west." She glanced at Abel. "He believed women belonged in established society, not on the frontier." His loss. Abel said simply, surprising himself with the comment. Their eyes met briefly before Beatrice looked away, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. And you, Mr. Rowley, no Mrs. Rowley waiting at Diamond R. Never found the time, he replied, though the answer felt insufficient. The truth was more complex: his experiences during the war, the loss of his parents, the harsh early years establishing his ranch had left little room for romantic considerations. And by the time the ranch was successful, he'd grown accustomed to solitude. Yet now, walking beside Beatrice as snowflakes began to fall around them, solitude suddenly seemed less appealing than it once had. The week before Christmas, Whispering Pines organized a holiday celebration at the schoolhouse, a community gathering with food, music, and small gifts for the children. Abel, who typically avoided such events, found himself accepting Beatrice's invitation without hesitation. "The children have prepared recitations," she told him, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Even the Henderson boys have memorized poems to present." The schoolhouse had been transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles that cast a warm glow over the gathered community. Abel stood somewhat awkwardly at the back of the room, watching as Beatrice orchestrated the children's performances with gentle encouragement. Mayor Thompson approached, offering Abel a cup of punch. "Glad to see you here, Rowley. Don't recall you attending the Christmas gathering before." Abel accepted the punch with a nod. Miss Jameson can be persuasive. The mayor's knowing smile suggested he understood more than Abel had said. "She's been good for this town. Enrollment at the school has doubled since her arrival. Even Frank Wilson's boys are attending regularly now." Abel watched as Beatrice helped a nervous young girl find her place in a Christmas carol. Her patience and kindness were evident in every interaction with her students. "She's dedicated," he agreed. "And unmarried," the mayor added casually. "Though I suspect that situation may not last long, given the number of eligible men suddenly finding reasons to visit the schoolhouse." Abel felt an unexpected surge of jealousy at the thought of other men pursuing Beatrice. Before he could respond, however, she approached them, slightly breathless from organizing the children. "Mr. Rowley, I'm so pleased you could come." Her smile was warm enough to melt the snow outside. "The children are about to present their Christmas pageant. I saved you a seat near the front." As Abel followed her to the reserved chair, he was acutely aware of the speculative glances from the other attendees. His unusual presence at a community event, combined with Beatrice's evident pleasure at his attendance, was undoubtedly providing fresh fodder for town gossip. Surprisingly, he found he didn't mind. The pageant was charming, the children's enthusiasm compensating for forgotten lines and missed cues. Abel applauded sincerely, especially for the Henderson boys who delivered their memorized verses with obvious pride. After the performances, as refreshments were served and the children received small gifts of candy and oranges, Beatrice joined Abel near the punch bowl. "What did you think?" she asked, her cheeks flushed with excitement and the warmth of the room. "Impressive," he replied honestly. "You've accomplished a great deal in a short time." Her smile was radiant. "The children did all the work. I merely provided guidance." "You provided more than that," Abel countered. "You gave them confidence, encouragement. That's a rare gift, Miss Jameson." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Thompson, who insisted Beatrice join her to distribute the remaining gifts. Before she left, however, Beatrice turned back to Abel. "Will you stay until the end? I thought perhaps. That is, I was hoping you might escort me home afterward." "I'd be honored," Abel replied, feeling an uncharacteristic warmth spread through him at her request. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, with community singing and shared stories. Abel found himself more comfortable than he'd expected among the townspeople, many of whom seemed genuinely pleased by his participation. When the gathering finally dispersed, Abel waited patiently as Beatrice bid farewell to the last families, thanking them for coming and reminding the children that school would resume after the new year. Finally, she collected her shawl and joined him at the door. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. She placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, the gentle pressure sending a pleasant sensation up his arm. "Thank you for waiting, and for coming tonight. It meant a great deal to me. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant against the black velvet sky. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, their breath forming clouds in the frosty air. "I have something for you," Beatrice said suddenly, stopping beneath a street lamp. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "An early Christmas gift. I'm not sure when I'll see you next, with the holiday approaching." Abel stared at the package in surprise. I didn't bring anything for you." "I don't expect anything in return," she assured him quickly. "Please open it." Carefully, Abel unwrapped the package to reveal a handsomely bound volume of Tennyson's poems, the same collection he'd been examining in the library when they'd encountered each other there. "You mentioned your mother enjoyed poetry," Beatrice explained, watching his face anxiously. "I thought perhaps, that is, I hoped it might bring you some pleasure." Abel ran his fingers over the embossed cover, deeply touched by the thoughtful gift. "Thank you," he said simply, unable to fully express what the gesture meant to him. They continued walking, the book safely tucked inside Abel's coat. As they approached Beatrice's cottage, he found himself reluctant for the evening to end. "When does school resume?" he asked, searching for a reason to see her again soon. "January 8th, she replied. "Though I'll be in town throughout the holiday, the Thompsons have invited me for Christmas dinner." Abel hesitated, then took a chance. "Would you? That is, Mrs. Peterson always prepares a special meal on Christmas Eve. It's just the hands and myself, but if you'd care to join us." Beatrice's face brightened. "I'd love to, truly." They had reached her door, and in the soft light from her window, Abel found himself studying her face, the delicate curve of her cheek, the way her eyelashes caught the light, the slight parting of her lips as she looked up at him expectantly. For a moment, he considered kissing her. The desire to do so was nearly overwhelming, but something held him back, perhaps the lingering habits of reserve or concern about moving too quickly. Instead, he took her hand and pressed it gently. "Good night, Miss Jameson." "I'll send Emmett with the wagon on Christmas Eve, weather permitting." "Good night, Mr. Rowley," she replied softly, "and thank you for a lovely evening." As Abel rode back to Diamond R through the crisp, starlit night, he found himself thinking about second chances and the unexpected turns life could take. For the first time in many years, he was looking forward to Christmas. Christmas Eve brought clear skies and moderate temperatures, a welcome respite from the harsh winter weather. Abel sent Emmett with the wagon to collect Beatrice as promised, while he and Mrs. Peterson prepared the ranch house for their guest. Fresh pine boughs decorated the mantel, their fragrance filling the main room, and Mrs. Peterson had outdone herself with the meal preparations. Abel found himself uncharacteristically nervous, checking his appearance in the small mirror in his bedroom multiple times. He'd trimmed his beard, donned his best shirt, and even polished his boots, efforts that earned a knowing smile from Mrs. Peterson. "Miss Jameson won't care if your boots shine," she commented as she bustled past with a platter of roasted potatoes. "It's the man wearing them that interests her." Abel chose to ignore this observation, though it sent a wave of warmth through him. He'd been carefully avoiding examining his feelings for Beatrice too closely, but there was no denying that she had become increasingly important to him over the past months. The sound of the wagon returning drew him to the window. Emmett was helping Beatrice down, her red woolen cloak bright against the snow. She was carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth, and her cheeks were pink from the cold air. Abel thought she had never looked more beautiful. He met her at the door, taking the basket as he welcomed her. "Miss Jameson, I'm glad you could come. I've been looking forward to it all week," she confessed with a smile. As she removed her cloak, Abel saw she was wearing a dress of deep green that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. "I brought apple tarts, my mother's recipe. I hope they'll be a welcome addition to the meal." "Most welcome indeed, Mrs. Peterson declared, appearing from the kitchen to greet their guest. "Come warm yourself by the fire, dear. Dinner will be ready shortly." The evening that followed was one of the most pleasant in Abel's memory. The ranch hands Emmett, Jacob, now recovering well from his wound, and young Thomas were on their best behavior, clearly charmed by Beatrice's friendly manner and genuine interest in their stories. Mrs. Peterson served a magnificent dinner of roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and winter vegetables from her root cellar. After the meal, they gathered in the main room where Emmett surprised everyone by producing a fiddle. "Thought we might have some music," he explained with a shy smile. Being Christmas Eve and all. His playing was surprisingly skilled, and soon everyone was joining in familiar carols. Even Abel found himself humming along, watching Beatrice as she sang, her clear voice rising above the others. When she noticed his attention, she smiled at him in a way that made his heart beat faster. As the evening drew to a close, the ranch hands tactfully withdrew to the bunkhouse, and Mrs. Peterson announced she was retiring for the night, leaving Abel and Beatrice alone by the fire. "Thank you for including me in your Christmas celebration," Beatrice said softly. "It's been wonderful." Abel added another log to the fire, watching the flames catch. "Thank you for coming. It's been different having you here. Good different." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the crackling fire the only sound in the room. Abel found himself studying Beatrice's profile, illuminated by the golden firelight. She seemed to belong here in this room, in this house, in a way he couldn't quite explain. "I have something for you," he said suddenly, remembering the package he'd hidden in his desk drawer. "A Christmas gift. It's not much, but—" He retrieved the small package wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with twine, feeling suddenly uncertain about his choice. Beatrice accepted it with evident delight. "You didn't need to get me anything." "I wanted to," he replied simply. She unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with a wildflower pattern carved into the lid. "Oh, Abel, it's lovely," she breathed, running her fingers over the detailed carving. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips sent a pleasant shiver through him. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a silver brooch in the shape of a book, with a tiny pearl set in its center. "I noticed you always wear a book-shaped pin on your collar," Abel explained. "When the silver peddler came through last month, I saw this and thought of you." Beatrice's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she carefully lifted the brooch from its box. "It's perfect," she whispered. "No one has ever given me something so thoughtful." Impulsively, she leaned forward and placed a soft kiss on his cheek. The brief touch of her lips sent a jolt through Abel that was both shocking and exhilarating. As she drew back, their eyes met, and Abel knew with sudden clarity that his feelings for Beatrice had grown far beyond friendship. Without conscious thought, he reached out to touch her cheek gently, then slowly leaned forward until his lips met hers in a tender, questioning kiss. Beatrice responded with a sweetness that made his heart soar. When they finally separated, Abel kept his hand on her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin beneath his calloused fingers. "I didn't plan this," he confessed quietly, "but I'm not sorry it happened." "Nor am I," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've hoped. That is, I've wondered if you might feel as I do." "And how is that?" Abel asked, needing to hear the words. Beatrice's eyes met his directly, courage overcoming shyness. "That something special has grown between us, something worth exploring further." Abel nodded, taking her hand in his. "I haven't let anyone close in a very long time. But you, Beatrice, you found your way past all my defenses." They talked long into the night, sitting close beside the fire, sharing hopes and fears, discovering the common ground that had drawn them together despite their different backgrounds. When the fire burned low and the hour grew late, Abel reluctantly acknowledged that it was time to escort Beatrice to the guest room Mrs. Peterson had prepared. At her door, he kissed her once more, savoring the sweetness of this new beginning. "Merry Christmas, Beatrice." "Merry Christmas, Abel," she replied softly. "I think this may be the happiest one I've ever had." As Abel lay in his bed that night, staring at the dark ceiling, he realized that something fundamental had shifted in his life. The solitude he'd once cherished now seemed empty compared to the warmth of Beatrice's presence. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, one that included sharing his life with someone else. The weeks following Christmas brought significant changes to Abel's life. His relationship with Beatrice blossomed from tentative beginnings into something deeply meaningful for both of them. They established a pattern of seeing each other several times a week, with Abel riding into town after school hours or Beatrice visiting Diamond R on weekends, always properly chaperoned by Mrs. Peterson. Their growing attachment didn't escape notice in Whispering Pines. The town watched with interest and generally approval as the reclusive rancher courted their schoolteacher with a formality that spoke of serious intentions. Mayor Thompson remarked to his wife that he hadn't seen Rowley look so alive since he came to the territory, while Mrs. Peterson confided to Emmett that she was already planning improvements to the ranch house, a woman likes certain comforts, you know. Abel found himself transformed by the relationship. Years of isolation had hardened him in ways he hadn't fully recognized until Beatrice's gentle presence began to soften those edges. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, and even accepted invitations to town gatherings he would previously have avoided. January passed into February, and with the worst of winter behind them, the rustler patrols were scaled back. The organized effort had been largely successful, with only occasional isolated incidents reported throughout the territory. Abel used the additional free time to court Beatrice properly, taking her on drives in his sleigh when the weather permitted, bringing small gifts that showed his growing understanding of her interests, books, of course, but also wildflower seeds for the small garden she planned behind her cottage. And once, a kitten from Diamond Artiquette's latest litter of barn cats. In late February, Abel invited Beatrice to accompany him to the territorial capital of Cheyenne, where business required his presence. Mrs. Peterson agreed to serve as chaperone, and the 3-day journey became a delightful excursion. Abel watched with pleasure as Beatrice explored the relatively sophisticated territorial capital, her eyes wide at the selection of goods in the larger stores and the variety of people on the busy streets. They attended a theatrical performance at the newly constructed Opera House, a simple melodrama, but enchanting nonetheless to someone who had been deprived of cultural experiences since leaving Philadelphia. Abel found himself watching Beatrice's reactions more than the stage, captivated by her expressions of delight and the way the gaslight illuminated her profile. During a quiet moment on their last evening in Cheyenne, while Mrs. Peterson visited with an old friend, Abel broached a subject that had been on his mind increasingly. "I've been thinking about the future," he began carefully as they sat in the hotel's small parlor, a discreet distance between them on the settee. "My future, our future, perhaps." Beatrice set aside her teacup, giving him her full attention. "I've been thinking about that as well. Diamond R is finally prospering," Abel continued. "The new breeding stock I purchased today will improve the herd significantly. In another year or two, it could be one of the most successful operations in the territory." "I'm happy for you," Beatrice said sincerely. "You've worked hard for that success." Abel took her hand gently. "What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, is that I'm finally in a position to offer someone to offer you a comfortable life. Not luxury, certainly not what you might have had back east, but security, respect, a good home." Beatrice's eyes widened as she realized the direction of his thoughts. "Abel." "I'm not proposing, not yet," he hastened to clarify. "That would be premature, but I wanted you to know that my intentions are serious. If after time you find that your feelings match mine, I would consider myself the most fortunate of men." The smile that illuminated her face told him everything he needed to know. "My feelings already match yours," she said softly, "but I appreciate your consideration in giving us both time to be certain." They returned to Whispering Pines with a new understanding between them, unspoken but evident in every glance and touch. The coming months, they both knew, would determine whether their growing attachment could develop into a lifetime commitment. March brought the first signs of spring to Wyoming Territory, patches of bare ground appearing through melting snow, longer days, and the occasional brave wildflower pushing through the frost-hardened earth. At Diamond R, preparations for calving season occupied every waking hour, with Abel and his men working from dawn until well after dusk to ensure the safe delivery of the new generation that would secure the ranch's future. Despite the demanding schedule, Abel made time for regular visits to Whispering Pines. Sometimes these were brief encounters just long enough to bring Beatrice a bunch of early wildflowers or share a cup of coffee at the general store, but they sustained both of them through the busy spring season. On the rare occasions when Beatrice could visit the ranch, she made herself useful, helping Mrs. Peterson with meals for the exhausted men, or sometimes accompanying Abel on easy rides to check the nearest pastures. These shared activities cemented their relationship, building a practical partnership alongside their deepening emotional connection. Early April brought Abel's birthday, a date he had mentioned to no one, not even Beatrice. He rose before dawn as usual, acknowledging the day only with a brief, silent remembrance of his parents, before turning his attention to the pressing matters of the ranch. Several cows were due to calve. A section of fence needed repair after recent rains had softened the ground, and the spring supply order needed to be finalized before he sent Emmett to town. Beatrice asked if you'd be coming to town today, Emmett mentioned casually as he prepared to depart with the supply list. Told her probably not, with 3 cows ready to drop. Abel nodded, ignoring the disappointment that tugged at him. Tell her I'll try to ride in tomorrow if things settle down. Emmett hesitated before adding, she seemed mighty interested in knowing the exact date of your birthday. Mrs. Peterson must have mentioned it was coming up. Abel frowned. She shouldn't have done that. You know how I feel about birthdays, the foreman shrugged. Maybe it's time to feel differently. Things change, boss, people too. With that cryptic comment, Emmett departed, leaving Abel to ponder his words while checking on a heifer showing signs of distress. By midday, the heifer had delivered a healthy calf, the fence was repaired, and Abel had almost forgotten about the birthday discussion. Late afternoon found him in the barn, examining a horse with a mild lameness, when he heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Stepping outside, he was surprised to see Emmett returning much earlier than expected, and even more surprised to spot Beatrice beside him on the wagon seat, a large covered basket in her lap. Abel wiped his hands on a rag and went to meet them, puzzled by this unexpected visit. Everything all right in town? Perfect, Emmett replied with an unusual grin. Just thought I'd bring back something more important than supplies. Beatrice smiled down at Abel as Emmett helped her from the wagon. I hope it's not an inconvenient time, she said, clutching the basket. But there's something I wanted to do today specifically. Abel glanced at the basket curiously. Never inconvenient to see you, but what's so special about today? Instead of answering, Beatrice turned to Emmett. Could you ask Mrs. Peterson to prepare coffee? And perhaps gather everyone in the kitchen in about 20 minutes, Emmett nodded, still wearing that puzzling smile, and headed toward the house with the supply packages. Will you walk with me? Beatrice asked Abel, nodding toward the old cottonwood tree that provided shade near the house. Just for a few minutes. Intrigued, Abel fell into step beside her, noticing that she held the basket carefully, as if its contents were fragile. When they reached the tree, she set the basket down and turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. Emmett mentioned that today is your birthday, she began. Abel stiffened slightly. It's just another day. Perhaps to you, she acknowledged. But when I asked why you never mentioned it, Mrs. Peterson told me about your parents. About what happened on your 21st birthday in the prison camp. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. I understand why you might not feel like celebrating. Abel was silent, surprised by the emotion that welled up at her words. Finally, he said, it seemed disrespectful somehow. To celebrate when they couldn't. Beatrice's eyes were soft with compassion. Do you think your mother would want you to never celebrate another birthday, to deny yourself even small joys because she's gone? The question struck Abel powerfully. He'd never considered it that way, had never examined the reasons behind his avoidance of birthdays beyond the painful memories they evoked. She was always the one who made birthdays special, he said quietly. After she died, it seemed wrong to celebrate without her. Beatrice nodded in understanding. My father died 5 years ago. He always read A Christmas Carol aloud on Christmas Eve, the whole story, doing all the voices. The first Christmas after he died, I couldn't bear to even look at the book. But the second year, I realized that reading it myself was a way to honor him, to keep his memory alive. She reached for the basket and carefully removed the checked cloth covering its contents. Inside was a cake not elaborate or professional, but clearly made with care. Simple white frosting covered the circular cake, with spring wildflowers arranged artfully around the edge. I thought perhaps. That is, I hoped you might consider allowing a new tradition to begin, Beatrice said, suddenly seeming uncertain. Not to replace your mother's celebrations, but to create something new that honors the life you've built here. Abel stared at the cake, overwhelmed by the gesture and all it represented. No one had baked him a birthday cake since his mother's death. The simple act of kindness pierced through years of deliberate forgetting, touching something deep within him that he'd thought long buried. "You baked this for me?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. Beatrice nodded, watching his face anxiously. "Mrs. Peterson gave me your mother's recipe for vanilla cake. She said it was your favorite as a boy." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, not just baking any cake, but seeking out his mother's recipe, moved Abel profoundly. Without a word, he drew Beatrice into his arms, holding her close as emotion threatened to overcome him. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "I don't deserve such kindness." Beatrice pulled back slightly to look at his face. "You deserve every happiness, Abel Rowley. More than you allow yourself." Their eyes held for a long moment before Abel bent his head to kiss her, pouring into the gesture all the feelings he couldn't yet express in words. When they finally separated, both were breathless. "We should go inside," Beatrice said softly. "Everyone's waiting to celebrate with you." Abel picked up the cake carefully. "First birthday cake in 14 years, he remarked, attempting to lighten the moment. "I hope I remember what to do," Beatrice laughed, linking her arm through his free one. "Just make a wish when you blow out the candle. That's the most important part." As they walked toward the house, Abel glanced down at the woman beside him, determined, compassionate, steadfast Beatrice, who had somehow found her way past all his carefully constructed barriers. He already knew what his wish would be. The kitchen was indeed full when they entered. Mrs. Peterson, Emmett, Jacob, and Thomas, all waiting with barely concealed excitement. Someone had hung a handmade banner that read "Happy Birthday Boss" in Jacob's distinctive handwriting, and the table was set with the good dishes that rarely saw use. "Surprise," they called in somewhat ragged unison, and Abel was startled to feel tears threatening. These people, his people, had become family without him quite realizing it. Mrs. Peterson bustled forward to take the cake, placing it in the center of the table where a single candle waited. "About time someone got you celebrating again," she said gruffly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Your mother would be pleased." The simple birthday celebration that followed was unlike anything Abel had experienced since childhood. There were no elaborate gifts, a new leather-bound journal from Beatrice, handcrafted items from each of the men, a knitted scarf from Mrs. Peterson, but the genuine affection behind each offering made them more valuable than any expensive present. They ate cake and drank coffee, sharing stories and laughter. Abel found himself relaxing into the celebration, allowing himself to enjoy the moment without guilt or reservation. And through it all, Beatrice was beside him, her quiet presence a constant reminder of how much his life had changed since her arrival in Whispering Pines. When the cake was eaten and the evening grew late, Abel walked Beatrice to the guest room that had become unofficially hers during her visits to Diamond R. At the door, he took both her hands in his. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for the cake, but for everything." Beatrice smiled up at him. "Did you make a wish when you blew out the candle?" Abel nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I did." "Care to share what you wished for?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice. "If I tell you, it won't come true," he replied, playing along. "But I think you might guess." Beatrice's eyes softened with understanding. "I think I might," she agreed. He kissed her goodnight, a gentle kiss full of promise before reluctantly releasing her hands. "Sleep well, Beatrice." "Happy birthday, Abel," she replied softly as she slipped into her room. Later, as Abel prepared for bed, he found himself reflecting on the day's events. A simple cake had somehow broken through years of deliberate isolation, allowing him to reconnect with the joy his mother had always intended birthdays to bring. And Beatrice, remarkable, unexpected Beatrice had known exactly what he needed before he knew it himself. For the first time in 14 years, Abel fell asleep on his birthday with a sense of peace and anticipation for the future. Spring advanced rapidly across Wyoming Territory, bringing the expected rush of activity to Diamond R. Calving season concluded successfully with minimal losses. The spring cattle drive to the territorial market was planned for early June, and ranch improvements that had been delayed by winter could finally be addressed. Throughout these busy weeks, Abel's relationship with Beatrice continued to deepen. Their meetings were sometimes brief, constrained by their respective responsibilities, but the quality of time spent together mattered more than the quantity. They were building something solid and lasting, a partnership based on mutual respect and growing love. In mid-May, Abel arranged for Emmett to manage the ranch for 3 days while he took Beatrice on a special excursion. He'd been secretive about their destination, asking only that she pack clothing suitable for outdoor activities. "Where exactly are we going?" Beatrice asked as Abel helped her into his wagon early on a Friday morning. Mrs. Peterson, their ever-present chaperone, was already seated, knitting needles clicking as she worked on a new project. "You'll see when we get there," Abel replied with uncharacteristic playfulness. "It's about 4 hours' drive." The journey took them northwest from Whispering Pines, following trails that grew increasingly primitive as they left settled areas behind. The landscape changed gradually, the rolling plains giving way to more dramatic terrain, rocky outcroppings, steeper hills, and in the distance, the shadowy outline of mountains. "It's breathtaking," Beatrice commented as they crested a rise that offered a panoramic view. "So different from the land around Diamond R." Abel nodded, pleased by her appreciation. "This whole region is beautiful, but this area has always been special to me." By early afternoon, they reached their destination, a small, crystal-clear lake nestled in a protected valley. Tall pines surrounded 3 sides, while a meadow bright with spring wildflowers stretched to the water's edge on the 4th. Near the tree line stood a simple but well-constructed cabin. "Welcome to Silver Lake," Abel said as he brought the wagon to a halt. "My private retreat." Beatrice looked around in wonder. "You own this. Bought it 3 years ago from an old trapper who was heading to Oregon," Abel explained as he helped her down. "It came with the cabin. I come up a few times a year, usually when I need to think or just get away from ranch demands." "It's wonderful," Beatrice breathed, turning in a slow circle to take in the view. So peaceful, Mrs. Peterson had already headed for the cabin, inspecting it with a housekeeper's critical eye. "Needs a good airing out," she called back to them, "but it's clean enough." "That trapper must have been unusually tidy," Abel smiled. "Actually, I rode up last week to make sure it was presentable. Didn't want Mrs. Peterson finding too much fault with my housekeeping." The afternoon was spent settling in, with Abel showing Beatrice the cabin's simple amenities and the surrounding area. They walked along the lakeshore, gathering wildflowers that Beatrice identified with her extensive knowledge of botany. Later, Abel rowed her out onto the lake in a small boat he kept tied at a primitive dock, pointing out the fish visible in the clear water and the eagles that nested in tall pines across the lake. As evening approached, they returned to the cabin where Mrs. Peterson had prepared a simple but hearty meal. After they ate, they sat on the cabin's porch, watching as the setting sun painted the lake in shades of gold and crimson. "I've never brought anyone here before," Abel said quietly as twilight descended. "It's always been my private sanctuary." Beatrice looked at him with understanding. "Thank you for sharing it with me. It means a great deal to know you trust me with something so personal." Mrs. Peterson, sensing the moment's importance, discreetly announced that she was tired from the journey and would retire early, leaving them alone on the porch with a lantern providing soft illumination. Once she had gone inside, Abel took Beatrice's hand, his expression serious. "I brought you here for a reason, Beatrice. This place, it represents possibilities to me. When I first found it, I saw it as an escape from responsibilities. But lately, I've been thinking of it differently." "How so?" she asked softly. "As a beginning, not an escape. A place to start something new." Abel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. I had planned a grand speech, but now that the moment's here, I find simple truth serves better. He opened the box to reveal a ring not ostentatious, but beautifully crafted with a single pearl set in intricate silver work. I love you, Beatrice Jameson. You've brought light back into my life when I'd resigned myself to shadows. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Beatrice's eyes filled with tears that caught the lantern light. Yes, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Yes, Abel, I love you too, more than I can express. Abel slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then drew her close for a kiss that sealed their commitment to each other. When they finally separated, both were breathless and smiling. Mrs. Peterson will be delighted, Beatrice said with a soft laugh. She's been dropping hints for weeks about wedding preparations. Abel grinned. Why do you think I brought her along? She'd never have forgiven me if she wasn't the first to know. They sat together in the gathering darkness, making plans for their shared future. The wedding would be in August, after the busiest part of the ranching season. Beatrice would complete the school term with plans to train a replacement for the fall. They would live at Diamond R, of course, though some modifications to the ranch house would be necessary to make it more suitable for a family. A family, Beatrice repeated softly when Abel mentioned this. I've always wanted children. Abel's arm tightened around her shoulders. I never thought I would, until I met you. Now I can't imagine anything more wonderful than having a family with you. The weekend at Silver Lake passed too quickly for both of them. They hiked the surrounding hills, picnicked by the lake, and spent hours in conversation, deepening their understanding of each other and solidifying their plans. By the time they returned to Whispering Pines on Sunday evening, their engagement was a settled fact, with only the formal announcement to the community remaining. The news spread quickly through the small town, meeting with general approval and not a little satisfaction from those who had watched the relationship develop. Mayor Thompson insisted on hosting an engagement dinner the following weekend, where the couple received congratulations from virtually every resident of Whispering Pines. June and July passed in a whirlwind of activity. Abel oversaw the successful cattle drive to market, returning with profits that exceeded expectations. Beatrice completed the school term and began training her replacement, a young woman from Denver who had impressive credentials and genuine enthusiasm for teaching on the frontier. At Diamond R, Mrs. Peterson directed improvements to the ranch house with the authority of a general marshaling troops. A new wing was added with a larger bedroom, sitting room, and eventually nursery. The kitchen was expanded, and the main living area updated with new furniture ordered from Cheyenne. Abel, amused by her enthusiasm, gave her free rein with the budget, wanting to create a comfortable home for his bride. Beatrice divided her time between school responsibilities and wedding preparations, with frequent visits to Diamond R to consult on the house improvements. Her natural practicality and Abel's desire to please her resulted in a home that balanced comfort with the realities of ranch life, beautiful but durable, elegant but functional. The wedding was set for August 18th, a date chosen to fall after the most demanding ranch work, but before the onset of fall weather. The ceremony would be held in Whispering Pines Small Church, with the reception following at the schoolhouse, which offered more space for the numerous guests expected from surrounding ranches and farms. As the date approached, Abel found himself increasingly impatient for the day when Beatrice would finally be his wife. Their stolen moments together were precious but insufficient, constrained as they were by propriety and busy schedules. 3 more weeks, he murmured during one such moment as they sat on the porch of Diamond R watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the distant plains. It seems an eternity. Beatrice smiled, her hand finding his. It will pass quickly enough, and then we'll have a lifetime together. Abel raised her hand to his lips. A lifetime doesn't seem long enough to love you properly, Beatrice Jameson. The weeks did indeed pass, and finally the wedding day arrived clear and perfect, with a sky of brilliant blue and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of late summer flowers. Abel, dressed in a new suit ordered from Cheyenne, waited at the altar with Emmett serving as his best man. The small church was filled to capacity, with latecomers standing along the walls. When Beatrice appeared at the church door on Mayor Thompson's arm, her father being deceased, a collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the congregation. Her dress, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace, had been ordered from Denver and altered by Mrs. Thompson. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning from the meadows around Diamond R, and her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant style beneath a simple veil. But it was her expression that captivated Abel, the radiant happiness that illuminated her face as their eyes met across the church. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that all the paths of his life, even the difficult ones, had been leading him to this place, to this woman who had taught him to embrace life again. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They had written their own vows, promises that acknowledged both the challenges and joys of the life they were choosing together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Abel kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one observer's eyes. The reception that followed was a true community celebration, with everyone contributing to make it special. Tables laden with food, music provided by local musicians, dancing that continued long into the evening. It was a day that would be remembered in Whispering Pines for years to come. As the festivities wound down, Abel and Beatrice slipped away, boarding the wagon that would take them to Silver Lake for a week-long honeymoon. Mrs. Peterson had gone ahead the previous day to prepare the cabin, leaving small touches of comfort and luxury throughout fresh flowers, fine linens, special foods. The drive to Silver Lake was filled with conversation and comfortable silences, both of them savoring the knowledge that they were finally, irrevocably joined. When they arrived at the cabin, the sun was setting across the lake in a spectacular display of color. "Welcome home, Mrs. Rowley," Abel said softly as he carried his bride across the threshold. Beatrice's arms tightened around his neck. "Home is wherever you are, Abel." The honeymoon week passed in a blur of happiness as they adjusted to their new status as husband and wife. They hiked, fished, swam in the lake, and spent long hours simply talking and enjoying each other's company without the usual constraints of work and social obligations. For both of them, it was a magical interlude before returning to the responsibilities awaiting them. When they finally returned to Diamond R, it was to a home transformed not just physically by the renovations, but emotionally by the knowledge that it was now truly their shared domain. The ranch hands welcomed them with a small celebration, and Mrs. Peterson had prepared all of Abel's favorite dishes for their first dinner as a married couple in their home. Autumn brought its own rhythms to the ranch cattle to be moved to winter pastures, hay to be stored, buildings to be weatherproofed before the first snows. Beatrice adapted quickly to ranch life, finding her place in the daily operations while maintaining her connections to the town through regular visits and involvement with the school board. As December approached, with its shorter days and longer nights, Abel found himself reflecting on the extraordinary changes the past year had brought. From solitary rancher to married man, from a life focused solely on work to one enriched by love and companionship, the transformation was profound. One evening, as they sat by the fire in their comfortable living room, Beatrice working on Christmas gifts while Abel reviewed the ranch accounts, he was struck by a sudden realization. "Do you know what today is?" he asked, setting aside his ledger. Beatrice looked up, a slight frown of concentration on her face. "Tuesday, December 5th, I believe." Abel moved to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her hand in his. "It's 1 year to the day since you first rode onto Diamond R land, looking for students and finding." Well, finding a rather gruff rancher instead, her expression softened with remembrance. "So it is, I hadn't realized. You changed my life that day," Abel said quietly, "though I certainly didn't know it then." "You changed mine as well," she replied, leaning against him. "I came west looking for adventure and independence. I never expected to find love." Abel kissed her temple gently. "I have something for you, an anniversary gift of sorts." He retrieved a small package from his desk drawer, placing it in her hands. "Open it." Beatrice unwrapped the package to reveal a journal bound in soft leather with her initials embossed on the cover. Opening it, she found the first page inscribed in Abel's neat handwriting. "For Beatrice, who taught me that birthdays and all days are worth celebrating. May this journal record our shared journey and the many celebrations to come. With all my love, Abel." "It's perfect," she said softly, tracing the inscription with her fingertips. "Thank you." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire and contemplating the journey that had brought them together. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, but inside Diamond R, warmth and love created a haven against the winter's chill. "I've been thinking," Beatrice said after a while, a slight hesitation in her voice, "about next April." Abel glanced at her curiously. "My birthday?" she nodded, a mysterious smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Yes, it will be a special one, I think. Because it's the first we'll celebrate as husband and wife." Beatrice's smile widened as she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "That, and because there will be 3 of us to celebrate instead of 2. Abel stared at her in stunned silence, comprehension dawning slowly. We're going to have a child," her eyes shining with happiness. Beatrice nodded. "Dr. Williams confirmed it yesterday. Our baby should arrive in early June." With a cry of joy, Abel gathered his wife in his arms, overcome with emotion. A child, the ultimate expression of their love, a new life that would carry forward the best of both of them. The ranch he'd built, the home they'd created together, would now truly become a legacy. As he held Beatrice close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, Abel silently thanked whatever fate or providence had brought her to Diamond R that day a year ago, the schoolteacher who had changed everything by simply baking him a birthday cake when he'd forgotten how to celebrate. With her, he had rediscovered not just the joy of birthdays, but the profound happiness of sharing his life completely with another soul. Outside, the snow continued to fall, beginning the cycle of seasons anew. Inside, a family was beginning a cycle of love and life that would endure far beyond the changing seasons of Wyoming Territory, creating a legacy of love that had started with a simple act of kindness from a woman who believed that every life and every birthday was worth celebrating.